Day 4 of the NASCAR trial is here. Bob Jenkins wrapped up. We learned that 2311 Racing and Front Row Motorsports nearly merged in 2021. Then NASCAR President Steve O'Donnell took to the stand. He talked about the cost of running certain races, how they landed Amazon, and a few other things that we'll get into as well. We learned where Raja Carruth will run the rest of his O'Reilly Auto Parts Series season at next season. Colleague Racing announced the numbers for their Truck Series entries for 2026. And Anthony Alfredo, he has a new home in 2026 as well. Welcome back to Break Hard. I'm Matt. Day 4 of the NASCAR trial is here. And before we get to that, maybe we all just take a little bit of a breather real quick. We'll talk about a couple other things, like Colleague Racing announced the numbers for their Truck Series lineup in 2026. They're going to start off with the 10 truck of Daniel Dye, the 12 truck of Brennan Butterbean Queen, the 16 truck of Justin Haley, the 14 truck, that's still TBD, would expect that to be whoever wins their gong show, or whoever the winner was of their gong show, and then the 25 truck, which will be their free agent all-star truck that they'll be running there. They really love the even numbers, except for the outlier of that free agent truck. But regardless, pretty solid number lineup for them. Didn't expect anything crazy. Obviously, the 16 is kind of a staple of the Colleague team at this point, as well as the 10. So fully expected those numbers to be in there. But now we know who or what number everybody will have next season. Now we just need them to like drop some merch and announce the gong show and whenever else they want to do all of that. Then we also learned where Raja Carruth will be running the rest of his O'Reilly Auto Parts Series season at next year. Obviously, we know he's going to do the majority of his season at Junior Motorsports. Fantastic. That's a great opportunity for him. He'll also be doing 10 races at Jordan Anderson Racing, returning to JAR. He'll be in that number 32 car for 10 races. Solid opportunity for Raja. Obviously, JAR cars they're formidable. They're not like maybe race winning cars at every track out there, but those cars certainly have speed in them. So yeah, should be a pretty good opportunity for him, especially as he looks to sort of get playoff eligible as well, if the playoffs are still around. I guess we'll have to wait and see how all that's going to play out. And then Anthony Alfredo, he is leaving Young's Motorsports. Obviously, Ryan Ellis, if you didn't watch Closing Laps this week, we had Ryan Ellis on to talk about his opportunity at Young's next year in the O2 car. Anthony Alfredo was driving for Young's in 2025 in that number 42 car. He will leave the team and join Viking Motorsports in a second full-time entry for that team in the number 96 Chevy Camaro. Obviously, he'll be teamed up with Parker Retzlaff. He'll be driving the number 99 car. Hey, Viking Motorsports went out and bought some of those Colleague Racing cars. They did that alliance with RCR. They're going both feet into the water at this point, and I love to see it. Love to see new teams come in. Love to see them take a chance, hire two guys that are really talented in both Anthony Alfredo and in Parker Retzlaff. So excited to see what that team can get done. But we got to move on to the NASCAR lawsuit. Day number 4 of the ongoing trial. And before we get into that, shout out to guys like Matt Weaver, Jeff Gluck, Jordan Bianchi, Toby Christie, Dalton Hopkins, who are there every single day so far this week, putting out fantastic recaps. Obviously, I'm not there. I have a professional job that outside of Break Hard here. So being in Charlotte just does not work out for my schedule or anything like that. So those guys putting out their write-ups, Gluck and Bianchi doing the recaps at the end of every day have been immensely helpful. I see a lot of people commenting and being like, how are you watching this, blah, blah, blah. I'm not. I'm literally checking Twitter like every hour and a half or so, and then just kind of keeping a running doc of different topics that are being discussed based off of what everybody has been posting whenever they get a break there. So shout out to everybody down there doing the work. Go follow all of those guys as well, girls as well. Jenna Fryer and others are there on top of this there in Charlotte as well. So yeah, really good. Also, I got to stop saying as well. I saw that in the comments there. Real crutch of mine. So self-awareness here. We're going to stop saying that going forward. But when we get into it, Bob Jenkins back on the stand on Thursday morning. He was there obviously in the afternoon on Wednesday as well, carried over into the morning session. They're really taking their time here. But we learned that 2311 Racing and Front Row Motorsports nearly merged in 2021. It was going to happen by all accounts until they found out that TRD just didn't have enough engines to do or take on 2 additional cars. So basically what it came down to was Bob Jenkins giving Denny Hamlin a time frame for Denny to decide if this is what he wanted to do. And that's where the legal team from NASCAR tried to kind of catch Bob a little bit here, because they're like, well, you gave him a small amount of time to make a pretty big decision here. How's that any different than NASCAR giving teams a small amount of time back in September of last year to sign the charter agreement, somewhere around like 6 or 7 hours? And Bob said the difference was Denny had multiple options, not just FRM, but he had BJ McLeod and Rick Ware and others if he wanted to do any type of deal there. The teams didn't have a choice. They either had to sign or lose their charters, is essentially what it came down to. So technically a choice, but not one that they could succeed at unless they wanted to, or, did sign the charters there. So I thought that was a pretty decent response by Bob. I understand where the NASCAR legal counsel was coming at it from like a situation standpoint, but ultimately kind of hard to compare the two of them. But they didn't end up merging together, which would have been interesting to see that, but obviously didn't happen there. Front Row Motorsports, Bob said that he gave him such a small time frame because he needed to let Roush Yates know if they were going to need engines for the 2022 season. So needed to get an answer out of Denny, and then obviously TRD couldn't take them on. Then we had some talk about how much it costs to run a NASCAR Cup Series team, because this week we've heard both FRM and 2311 Racing say that it costs $20 million to put a Cup Series car on track every single year. Except NASCAR notes that it only costs Front Row Motorsports $29 million to run a two-car operation, so $14.5 million a car there. Bob said that he was just going off of the team survey, sort of what the average was for running a Cup car there. So that's where the $20 million number came from, and said he was happy that his team could do it for less, basically that they were running lean for the most part there. Then they asked him why he signed up for the Gen 7 car, why he signed off on it and agreed to it in 2019. And he said because it was only supposed to cost then $205,000 and now cost $350,000. So the math there isn't mathing out too well. It's $145,000 more than what it was originally supposed to cost. So yeah, obviously some things changed in the time period there from 2019 to 2025 now, but yeah, that's a really, really big increase. But nothing earth-shattering came out of Bob necessarily on Thursday. It was a lot of back and forth, a lot of them trying to the NASCAR side of things, trying to get them to mousetrap themselves essentially, which is just kind of what the whole legal process here is about. But I thought Bob answered their questions pretty well based on everything that I've read, and same can be said for how Scott Prime answered things yesterday and how Steve O'Donnell in the afternoon session also answered some things as well. So we'll move over to Steve, because NASCAR president Steve O'Donnell took to the stand on Thursday morning, late in the morning. Then they broke for an extended lunch break because Judge Kenneth Bell had some meetings he had to attend. And then they were back in the afternoon session where Jeffrey Kessler once again was cross-examining Steve. And then in the latter portion of the Thursday afternoon session, NASCAR's legal counsel got up and started questioning Steve as well. So the Jeffrey Kessler side of things, where he was cross-examining Steve, actually gave us some decent information that, we knew a little bit about, but didn't get into fully, like how much it costs to do Chicago, Mexico, LA Coliseum, and why he was so concerned with the SRX series. Ultimately, Steve O'Donnell is a company guy. He is a ride or die for NASCAR, for the France family, and he's going to protect his job. One, because he gets paid $1.2 million a year plus bonuses, which, yeah, ride for them, Steve. I completely understand it. But at the same time, he wants to be good at his job. So he always keeps an eye out for threats that are coming. And he's worried about SRX. He's worried about other series coming along. We've obviously heard them talk about, a potential live thing or anything that goes along with that. And Kessler asked him about the exclusive contracts, even with non-SMI tracks. And that's kind of a bit of an eye-opener, because they have those exclusive contracts with SMI where they, SMI wasn't allowed to host an SRX series race or anything like that. But they also had them with Road America, for example, for their Xfinity series race. And that was kind of an interesting thing there, because it had seemed like it was only with SMI, but turns out it was with other tracks as well. Staying on the topic of the tracks. So let's talk about the NASCAR Chicago street race. Obviously, that is a polarizing race amongst the fan base, right? I think it's one of the best races NASCAR's ever done, one of the best events they've ever done. If you didn't get the chance to attend, I wish you could have, because from an event standpoint, especially 2025 is a little bit leaned down. 2024, absolutely phenomenal event, even though it, of course, rained, because that's just what happens. 2025 didn't rain, but scaled down a little bit there. Overall, I thought those were really fun. They did a lot for the sport. They cost $55 million over the 3 years to run those street races, but at the same time, that helped them land the Amazon deal, doing Chicago and going to Mexico. Mexico ended up costing NASCAR $6 million, plus they had to pay $60,000 in track upgrades to get it ready for the Cup Series. Okay, I guess I can only assume it's where they sort of shortcut the course at to avoid going down where Formula One goes into that small stadium, not the actual stadium section, but on the sector 1, sector 2 area of the racetrack. They kind of cut that there. Doesn't matter. They spent $6 million doing that. But because they did those 2 races, that helped them land the Prime streaming deal, which netted them $1 billion. So, spend $61 million, end up making $1 billion over here. Yeah, it netted out to be pretty good for them. So that's why they wanted to do it. We also learned that they spent $10 to $12 million total to do the LA Coliseum Clash, which honestly feels a little bit cheaper than I expected. I mean, yeah, it's expensive, don't get me wrong, but to put a temporary racetrack into a stadium and only costing you that much over 3 years, I mean, you're looking at $4 million a year, essentially. All right, I can get behind that as maybe something that they could do into the future. And that was a really good proof of concept to be like, hey, we can kind of do this wherever we want at now. And it's not wildly expensive. It's expensive. Don't get me wrong. Obviously I was sitting here yesterday saying that $168,000 for internet on pit road was expensive. I'm not saying that $4 million a year to do a temporary street circuit's not expensive, or temporary oval not expensive, but I mean, Chicago street race cost $55 million over 3 years. So, that's not 20 million, but, in that $18 million a year range versus 4, not too bad. Not too bad there. So yeah, that you can hopefully that helps people understand why they kind of took some of these risks out there, because it ultimately did pay off for them, which I think is not a bad thing at all. Then we got to the topic of competitor series, specifically SRX. Now, I've said throughout this whole thing that maybe I'm underestimating SRX, or maybe they're overestimating SRX, but I never viewed SRX as a threat. And we finally got to hear from Steve why he thinks it's a threat. And after I heard it, I can kind of understand it now. So O'Donnell was fine with SRX when it started. That's why they allowed Tony Stewart, who at the time owned NASCAR charters, obviously owned a NASCAR Cup Series team. That's why they were fine with him doing it, because it wasn't supposed to be NASCAR, right? It was supposed to be retired drivers driving spec cars on grassroots tracks around the country on different networks. Sure, fine, but it wasn't NASCAR. Then in year 2 and year 3, they started to attract more and more active current NASCAR Cup Series drivers. I mean, Brad Keselowski did a full season. You had Denny Hamlin running races, Kyle Busch, Chase Elliott, Ryan Blaney, a lot of guys running races for SRX. And that's when Steve started to get a little bit concerned about it, because it was starting to look more like NASCAR than what they had anticipated or were told it was going to look like. So in that text message where he said we should have legal look at this after Denny Hamlin went over and ran an SRX race, it wasn't necessarily have legal look at barring Cup Series drivers from running an SRX race. It was have legal look at SRX, because Steve was worried about copyright infringement. Now, Shannon McMenemy, who has been sort of the legal representation on the Teardown podcast with Jeff Gluck and Jordan Bianchi, did a great preview episode. Also did a great, I didn't listen on Wednesday night, but on Tuesday night, she did a great appearance on there as well. She tweeted out that this is referred to as trade dress. Essentially, you can't copy something to the point where the consumer is confused on what's the original and what's the dupe at this point. Now, I would argue that motorsport fans, NASCAR fans, stock car racing fans can tell you the difference between NASCAR and SRX. I don't think that there's any question around that. But when you start to have them racing stock cars with current NASCAR Cup Series drivers on network television at racetracks that you potentially could see NASCAR racing at as well, then people are going to start being like, all right, is this NASCAR? Is this affiliated with NASCAR? Is this associated with NASCAR? And that's not what NASCAR wanted. NASCAR was fine with it being what it was when it started out in year number 1. Not really fine with it, how it ended up being in year 2 and year 3. Ultimately, they put themselves out of business. Paul Tracy crashed half a dozen race cars and doomed them. That wasn't the reason why they got doomed, but he did crash a lot of race cars. He was entertaining. The thrill from West Hill. What's not to like about Paul Tracy? So yeah, that's kind of where Steve's thought process was with SRX, and I can get behind it now that I sort of have heard what the feeling there was. Then they talked about the Heather Gibbs letter. Heather Gibbs penned a thoughtful letter to NASCAR brass, basically why permanent charters were so important to her race team, her family, and to NASCAR as a whole. It was a nice letter. Obviously, there's certain things that you can pick apart from it for sure, but Heather Gibbs is next in line to take over Joe Gibbs Racing after Joe unfortunately has lost both of his sons. She's taken on a much bigger role within the sport, or within the team rather, over the last couple of seasons. So there were some messages from Steve O'Donnell that said that Jim France was swearing every other word while reading the Heather Gibbs letter. To which today, referred to him as OD. Steve O'Donnell said that Jim was not swearing. That was more just a figure of speech, just frustration with it there. Take that as you will, whether or not you think Jim France was swearing up and down about it or not. But yeah, it was, maybe not the best thing to put into writing. Ultimately, I don't think it really matters. There's also another funny moment where Jeff Gordon had reached out to Steve O'Donnell, Ben Kennedy, to ask if the France family was open to a new business model. Ben Kennedy said, yeah, they would explore it. Ultimately, they were not. But Gordon just refers to the Frances as the family, which sounds like straight out of a mob movie. And I thought it was just really funny to be like, that's how the negotiating, committee, the TNC, was referring to them at this point. So yeah, Thursday was a busy day. We learned a lot about sort of just track prices and temporary prices for, temporary racetracks and everything like that. I would expect Steve to wrap up on Thursday afternoon, maybe return on Friday morning, but I would expect them to start moving on to their next witnesses after that. And hey, we'll ultimately see who's going to be called up next and when, if we're going to see Richard Childress. If we do see him, probably won't be until next week, but that will be must read, because I can't say must watch at this point. So let me know in the comments what you think about Roger Carruth, his plans for 2026, the Ram Kaulig truck number lineup, Anthony Alfredo joining Viking Motorsports, what Bob Jenkins talked about in the morning session of day 4 of the NASCAR trial, 2311 Racing for FRM Motorsports potentially could have merged in 21, and then what Steve O'Donnell said during his session in the afternoon about temporary circuits, pricing, landing Amazon, SRX, and everything else. Like and subscribe to the channel. Follow me on TikTok @BreakHard, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook @BreakHardBlog.